Islands are jewels of biodiversity and cultural heritage. They symbolize paradise and pristine natural beauty. Their isolation and unique ecosystems make them remarkable. Yet, they are at the forefront of an escalating global crisis.
Island systems are the ones who are very sensitive to climate change.
Rising seas threaten coastlines, and erratic weather patterns bring storms and droughts, putting the delicate balance of these systems at risk.
It is very important to recognize that the largest contributors to global warming and sea level rise are not the island themselves, but major economies such as China, the European Union as a whole region, and North America. Yet, these major economies often fail to look back at the communities most affected by global warming, which are precisely the coastal and island nations.
Beyond climate change, islands struggle with long-standing sustainability challenges. Still, islands are more than just vulnerable. They are also beacons of resilience. Their struggles and innovations hold valuable lessons on how to prevail in an era of climate change.
Island communities are since ever confronted with more difficulties in accomplishing or managing their resource flows. But I think these factors also contribute to a more creative or also innovative way of island communities to handle and manage their resource flows.
The unique characteristics of islands make them powerful models to guide sustainable change everywhere. The future of islands mirrors the future of us all. It's a story we cannot afford to ignore. Islands are not just landscapes. They are dynamic systems. Just like humans consume food to produce energy, sustain themselves, and produce waste and heat, islands take in resources to maintain their population's demands while producing outputs like waste and emissions. This concept of input, demand, and output is known as the metabolism of islands. This analogy isn't just theoretical. It's the foundation of valuable research. At the forefront are groups of scientists and experts studying the metabolism of islands to uncover patterns, vulnerabilities, and opportunities for more sustainable resource management. By analyzing these patterns, researchers can identify vulnerabilities like over-reliance on imports or waste buildup. These metabolic insights are not just data, they're tools for resilience planning. Every system has drivers. On islands, the metabolism begins with demand, the need for services like housing, transportation, and sanitation. As populations grow and migration increases, demand rises. This drives the expansion of infrastructure and services.
So an example from islands, so you see Maldives, in 50 years, you see how infrastructure changed over time. Because Maldives was becoming a popular destination for tourism, for going diving. And so places like Maldives, they attracted, and suddenly they started to build because they got the money. They started to build infrastructure. Now you can see there's not much space there.
Services like clean water, energy, and housing are essential, but they create a feedback loop. More people and growing affluence lead to more demand, which leads to more services to meet that demand. This self-reinforcing cycle ensures that demand influences every aspect of an island's metabolism. Demand drives inputs. Inputs are essential to sustain daily life and support development. Construction materials build homes and roads. Food imports sustain growing populations, and fuel powers everything from transport to energy grids. To meet the growing needs of their populations, islands rely heavily on imports.
this reliance on external factors, whether it's tourists visiting to spend money, imported fuel, or imported basic household goods like food, it can have a major impact which the island itself often has no control over. So this need for resilience is really critical, and it also just means that those small global changes can adversely impact those islands.
What comes in must eventually go out. Every input once used generates an output. Organic waste from food, packaging materials from imports, emissions from energy production, and discarded construction materials are all part of the final stage of the island's metabolic flow. Just as imbalances in a human's metabolic system, like poor nutrition or an unhealthy lifestyle, can lead to health problems, unsustainable practices in waste, energy, food, and water systems create significant risks for islands, threatening their environment, economies, and communities. Waste management on islands faces unique challenges: limited land for disposal, low recycling rates, and the cost and complexity of exporting waste mean that growing waste outputs remain on the islands, straining their ecosystems.
Waste processing is a big issue, of course, in a small island state due to the limitations of scale, the limitations of technological advancement in small island states and for small island states, and environmental pollution and associated health hazards.
If you look at what goes back into the economy, is less than 1%. And less than 1% of the outflows are actually going back for recycling or for reuse, which is very low. The world average, like currently, is 7.6% in 2023. That's called the circularity rate, and that is not great either. 7.6 is like still bad, but this is less than 1%, and this is typical for many island studies that we have looked at. Circularity rate is very low.
Fiji is a small and dispersed island nation, and the volumes of recyclable materials generated are often too low to justify investment in large-scale recycling infrastructure. For example, running a recycling plant or collection network across multiple islands becomes economically unviable when the material flow isn't consistent or dense enough.
Since Aruba had such a small capacity to process waste, everything was dumped in the landfill. So this was tires, this was asbestos, cadaver, medical waste, you had household waste, you had industrial waste, so you had everything being dumped at the same spot and no way to sort it. Small incinerator, but of course not enough. Aruba produces about like 88,000 tons of waste per year. And as we know, Aruba is also a tourist economy based. And so, of course, they do not have the capacity to care for that much waste coming in.
There is a company which was collecting and separating the trash. There was the government company and there was private company. And that private company would separate all the metals and non-ferrous and non-ferrous metal. And in that non-ferrous metal, there was more than 1 million sunblocks, spray cans. And that would end up normally in the environment of Aruba. It was more than 1 million cans by tourists in Aruba, discarded in Aruba.
Most islands depend heavily on imported fossil fuels for energy, which is both costly and environmentally damaging.
Most of the energy, of course, is produced still using heavy fuel oil, and that heavy fuel oil is imported from abroad. So you're dependent on imported fossil fuels for your energy needs, and that also makes an island, of course, vulnerable to price fluctuations and supply disruptions. If the tankers do not come in, or if the international prices get too high, our energy needs are under enormous stress, actually.
It's very common for many islands to have a single sector that really dominates the economy. That could be tourism, it could be the government, in some cases it's other industries, but consistent across them, energy is a major challenge that connects them because of the high costs. And so it's a really interesting intersection between tourism and the energy sector when you're very reliant on these high cost imported fuels to run a tourist-driven economy. And the combination between those two makes islands very vulnerable to external shocks.
In Mauritius, which is quite representative of the SIDS, fossil fuels account for 82.6% of electricity generation. Mauritius has no proven reserves of natural gas or coal, making it heavily reliant on imports to fuel its power plants. This reliance on imported fossil fuels make Mauritius vulnerable to price fluctuations, higher energy prices, and supply disruptions in the global market.
Once food exporters, many islands now rely heavily on imports for most of their food demands. This dependency leaves them exposed to price surges and supply chain disruptions.
So in the Caribbean, 83% in monetary value is basically the food import bill, right? So that's very high. And this wasn't always the case. The Caribbean was a net food exporter up until the 1970s. And since the 70s, due to policies and trade agreements and also change in the agriculture system, that was again following the trade agreements, that importing most of the staples and regular food, but just producing exotic, superfoods for export, you see a shift that most of the basic food requirements are coming from outside. So this is a tipping point scenario where certain policies and agreements can tip the system from being food secure to food insecure.
If you look into the agricultural sector and as a whole to the Maldives, the main challenges that we face in terms of food security is we are a food import dependent country where almost all of our food consumption, 90% of the food we consume is being imported. So we are highly dependent on food imports. The other main challenges that we faced is limited arable land and freshwater resources. And we have been experiencing this recently is a rise in food prices due to inflation. And local communities, their inability to produce food to meet the local community demand.
Because islands rely heavily on imported food, they need steady income to keep those supply chains going. For many, that income comes from exporting fish, one of the few available economic sectors. But this creates a difficult trade-off. With limited diversification, heavy dependence on fishing can lead to overexploitation of marine resources.
So when we think about fisheries and we think about declines in fisheries and impacts on the people that depend on them, there is pollution that we talked about a little bit, but there's also overfishing and there's habitat change. And probably the number one impact that we see is overfishing, that people have simply taken too much. And this is a consequence of increasing populations, but it's an increase also of the capitalization of fisheries. Another aspect is the change in habitat. And so one of the things that we think about is bottom trawling, where you're towing a big net, or in some cases a drag, across the bottom, which is modifying the substrate, which then changes the ability of that habitat to generate fish, to support fish. And then you've got pollution. And so all of these things, and climate change, of course, is aggravating all of these things. So what that all results in is cumulative effects. And almost always when you see a population disappear, it's not one thing, it's a whole series of things that have changed.
Water scarcity is one of the most pressing challenges for islands. Climate change has made rainfall less predictable, while rising seas threaten freshwater reserves with saltwater intrusion.
We are a climate vulnerable community where we experience seasonal sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, where most of the islands, the freshwater layer has been depleted or been contaminated with fecal matter or with the salt, and sudden abrupt changes in the weather condition where some islands experience prolonged dry weather condition.
Aruba is an extreme example there. We actually hardly have any fresh water over here. But at the same time, we have 2 million tourists and 120,000 people living here. We can never sustain such an amount of people without importing oil, digesting that oil and turning that oil into water.
The tendency is to have everything around buildings also very beautifully in terms of tarmac, in terms of concrete, so it looks nice, but where will the water go? And the tendency currently just to send always in the drain. So we have huge drains constructed, but we know that this is not the way to do it. It should go in the soil. So people don't know that fundamental cycle of water, but we can't just send all the water to drains and go to the sea. It will not replenish our aquifers underground and also our reservoirs.
Due to climate change, island communities have had to shift their traditional ways of life to adapt to the new challenges coming their way.
The very same qualities that make small islands seem like paradises also contribute to making it so difficult for SIDS to adapt. Adaptation needs to occur in every sector and at every scale. We need to adapt our infrastructure, our healthcare systems, our livelihoods, even our relationships and dependence on the environment.
Mauritius being a small island, I think land is very scarce. That's one major challenge. And people in the past have been moving close to the beach because Mauritius is a very touristic island. They would want to go close to the beach. Now, knowing that global warming is there and the sea is rising, so people are now a bit apprehended by this now, and they would tend to move more inland. So we have stress now. Do you still develop along the coast where you have still very beautiful beaches and land is very expensive there and still very much sought after? But the challenge there is how do we construct these areas in a sustainable way that they adapt to climate change? Because if you don't do it right, it's going to be very difficult in terms of energy requirement and also the runoff, the flooding, and so on. So this is, I think, the major problem currently we're facing.
Additionally, adaptation to climate change is driving the growth of new types of infrastructure, such as seawalls and artificial islands. While essential, these projects rely heavily on imported materials, making them costly and resource-intensive.
Climate adaptation infrastructure presents unique challenges for SIDS. The initial cost of building is already very high because of the heavy reliance on imported materials. And then when disaster strikes, islands are faced with the added expense of rebuilding this damaged infrastructure. This is creating a double burden for island economies that are already strained, and losses tend to be several times their GDP.
Despite their high cost and the strain disasters leave behind, these adaptation projects are essential for survival. But without access to climate finance, many island nations simply can't afford to implement them.
One of the main challenges of SIDS accessing sufficient finance for their adaptation and resilience needs is that the process of writing proposals and getting funds approved is incredibly bureaucratic. It takes a really long time and uses up a lot of resources, and those are resources that SIDS simply don't have.
Metabolic risks translate directly into social and economic challenges for island communities. Inequality, food insecurity, and economic hardship are often exacerbated by external shocks like natural disasters and pandemics. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed and deepened existing vulnerabilities. With tourism halted and imports delayed, many island communities face rising unemployment and food insecurity. Furthermore, overdevelopment, waste mismanagement, and resource depletion due to tourism are damaging the very ecosystems and communities that attract visitors.
Sì, sì, posso ti un voto tanto questo passa. No, a me che vai e ref, e casa di ref ando tiena, boto wa con grandi e da. E com eta mani bandi, eta bandi lama. Sì, sì. Tem certo coisa que já cai de lama, vai. Sì, sì, poi aiuta perché da bandi lama mis. Almeno con nada parbando di trici. Stop e non porta.
Once a month, they would burn tires to make more space in the landfill because, of course, again, it was at full capacity in 2006. So they needed to burn a lot of things to be able to make more space in the landfill. And in my research, I did like an analysis of how the winds would turn. And so often it would turn in a way that would go into Park Limos in this particular community. And so you could see that there was like pockets of people that were being more affected than others in terms of health or in terms of other nuisance that they had.
But tourism creates tension within island communities. While some welcome it for the jobs and money it brings, others resist because of its harmful effects on the environment and local life. Over-tourism has caused coastal damage, destroyed important natural areas, and led to private companies taking over local land.
There is a lot of construction at the coastline, a lot of hotels. Mm-hmm. And you're saying that there are protests, like people don't want new hotels, or because there are just too many, or how is that?
Yeah, there are too many, and I think a big problem in this area specifically is that it's very close to the area that we are right now, Bali Place, which is very diverse in both flora and fauna, and having all of these buildings around this area brings it in danger of staying the way that it is.
there has been like a protest going on of someone writing no more hotels just here to really show that we have to protect this area because it's an important part of the island and not just the tourism industry.
Beyond its environmental impacts, tourism often leaves island communities disconnected from the economic benefits it brings.
Maldives has always had one island, one resort concept, which means once a tourist lands the Maldives, the airport, you will find that they are taken from the airport directly to the island, where the resort island is disconnected from the local island on an economic front, on a physical front. So it's an economy of its own. So the disconnect is very apparent. It's still the elites who control the resorts, and local people are not really reaping the benefit of the tourism. The money that comes in, the dollar that comes in, foreign currency that comes in, is actually not seeping to the local community.
While the challenges islands face are immense, so too is their potential for innovation. Across the globe, island communities are adapting their systems to build resilience and embrace sustainability. Closing the loop on waste is one of the most pressing challenges for islands. By rethinking how materials flow through their systems, islands are turning waste into resources.
And working in the Caribbean region, where I was able to talk to officials down there, including ministers in meetings, presenting the whole policy aspect of extended producer responsibility. That is kind of the policy intervention where the producers now lead and take responsibility. And essentially this is stretching the life cycle thinking of the product's life as it's made its journey in use. And now it has no value anymore through use. It needs to be recycled. This is kind of, I think, the lens that I've been looking at, is how islands can utilize global policies from the north and apply them in island countries, but not so much themselves, but maybe in a system-wide approach.
Well, our first project that still exists right now was called Branches Lab, which is a makerspace.
Oh, the makerspace.
Yeah. So we initially built all of the tools out of e-waste. So we got motors and stuff out of broken Xerox printers that just kind of stay here because they're not exported. And then we use them with offcuts off of a company that makes windows and doors to make CNC machines here. So 3D printer, CNC cutter, laser cutter. So we use all these open source concepts to build machines that we thought could be used to fix things and fill gaps and adapt things that break easily here, where you often can't find a piece, one of these things will break and then you won't be able to find another plastic clip, and then you'll have to buy a whole new stand for a plastic clip.
Recycling programs are also gaining momentum. By sorting and reusing materials locally, communities are reducing waste buildup, regaining valuable resources, and keeping them in the system. Islands are charting a path toward energy independence by harnessing renewable energy sources.
So I wanted to share an example from the Orkney Isles in the north of Scotland, where they're home to the European Marine Energy Centre. And it's a really fascinating example of how islands are pioneering innovative solutions based on their extreme location, but using that as an advantage to create economic development opportunities as well.
Barbados have been very successful in implementation of solar systems. So there is lots of lessons learned from islands across the globe.
These renewable energy systems not only reduce fossil fuel dependency, but also cut emissions and improve energy security. Food security is another critical area where islands are adapting. Local and innovative farming systems are helping reduce reliance on imports.
There are some floating farms used in Indonesia by the local farmers, which are prone to flooding, and local food system can be sustained if a disaster happens. So having some sort of similar technologies and systems in place which are appropriate for each island, and considering their vulnerabilities and their capacities, would be really helpful when we are considering localization of the market.
Hydroponics is an innovative hydroponics farm, and we produce currently leafy greens, mainly lettuce. So we actually just pass a constant layer of water with nutrients through the roots of the plant. And in order for lettuce to grow, it actually needs a specific temperature. And so what we do is we cool the water. So we have chillers that cool the water before it reaches plants. And that's a continuous process. We grow a few 100,000 heads of lettuce per year. And I think that we contribute to food security because we're actually growing things in Aruba. We've shown that it is possible to grow good, healthy food.
By producing food locally, islands are creating jobs, improving nutrition, and building resilience against external markets and global supply chain disruptions. Nature-based solutions offer powerful protection for island communities. Restoring mangroves helps secure freshwater supplies by reducing saltwater intrusion, while growing healthy coral reefs act as natural barriers against storm surges and coastal erosion.
Turning the Tide project is a project that was funded by Resambit, and it's a collaborative project between Wageningen, ACF, Aruba Conservation Foundation, Scuba Bubbles, and the University of Aruba. And the main goal of this project is actually to restore mangroves and coral reefs, because the nature in Aruba is quite degraded, unfortunately. The idea was to really install artificial reef structures where we can then outplant the corals. And for the mangroves, we try to restore the waterways. So instead of just outplanting mangroves, we try to restore the waterways, so reconnecting the mangroves to the natural flow of the water. That has been proven to also really help them better than just outplanting.
These solutions show that islands are not just adapting to challenges, they're leading the way in building a future that is both resilient and sustainable. Tourism is a key economic pillar for many island nations. By rethinking how it's managed, we can ensure it benefits local communities, protects nature, and strengthens island economies.
My vision to the Maldives is that the local community would hand in hand work with the tourism sector in understanding the whole system, the biosphere system. What are the interactions there? What are the species that are thriving on not just the lagoon but also on the island? And then carving out a unique relationship that is mutually beneficial to both tourism sector, to the local community, and also to the species that are thriving the system, so that we can actually save our most valuable asset, which is the nature.
Behind every success story of sustainability on islands is the power of collaboration. Local knowledge, community engagement, and partnerships with researchers and policymakers drive meaningful change.
For example, we organized, I mentioned, a series of visioning focus groups with various local interest groups, and this happened primarily to generate data initially, qualitative data, but at the same time, these groups provided a platform for locals to exchange and explore future opportunities for their island. And the fact that we actually organized them together with them was in itself an empowering experience. So helped eventually a local sustainability action group to develop and form into an association eventually.
Empowering island communities starts with recognizing their unique knowledge and strengths.
Creole houses used to be built, it used to be iron sheets and timber, still quite strong, and we used to have these nice terraces around it. So you have, of course, the interior area where you live, but you also had these terraces around it, which is shading the interior spaces. And it was oriented, like you say, for wind to come in. And typically people will be planting tall trees around it in specific orientation in the east and west, so you don't get this very warm sun in the evening. So this is basically what passive design is, and I think passive design is key. Are people doing it? No, people have forgotten these principles, and you're just putting air conditioning and just putting artificial lighting. They have forgotten the good principles of daylighting and ventilation. I think we need to revisit that and re-educate people how we can integrate these nice principles in concrete.
Here in Hawaii, we steward a place that is somewhat arid and dry, and it's near the ocean. And as we kind of traverse this landscape, anytime we reach an area that was a former house site, traditional dwelling, and it's now, lava. As soon as you get to that area, you can immediately feel the ocean breeze, and it comes up, from down below. You could walk 20 feet in one direction, it's super hot, and you come there and it's taking, so our ancestors really understood the specificities of place and how to align houses to the environment.
When combined with innovation and scientific research, these strengths create solutions tailored to the needs of the community. Educational programs exemplify the power of collaboration. By equipping the next generation with skills in science and critical thinking, islanders will be empowered to lead the charge in tackling sustainability challenges.
For Fiji, one of the biggest issue is like people going out of Fiji to get educated and get settled, get more income, of course. So, there's a brain drain there. If international institutions can just try to come up with some programs that educate professionals or maybe students from these islands and equip them with proper technical knowledge to conduct these kind of analysis, that would be best for these islands.
Well, how the system program started, Sustainable Island Solutions through Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics, is really something that started out in 2010, when we started to realize here at the University of Aruba that we cannot remain dependent on external expertise, consultancy, other universities coming to do research in small island states, in places like Aruba, without having ownership, without having counterparts in the universities, in the community. So what is happening right now is that we have in place a bachelor program and a master program that really cater for developing that expertise, not only environmental expertise, but also systems thinking, critical thinking, understanding the complexities of working with society, working with data, and working with environmental matters in order to support the sustainable development of a small island state like Aruba.
Island communities have shown us that with the right set of tools, education, support, and partnerships, they are able to rise above their challenges and secure a better future for themselves. The story of islands is a story of resilience, innovation, and hope. The lessons learned from islands resonate far beyond their shores. They show us that sustainability isn't just an aspiration, it's a necessity.
There are 57 small island developing nations in the world. At present, most of them survive on imports of food, energy, and manufactured goods. The challenge now is to rebuild their economies based on a model of the metabolism of islands. This means developing renewable energy sources, building closed-loop waste recovery systems, and reconfiguring cities to operate on far higher standards of energy efficiency. This would allow the small islands to become living examples of sustainable development.
In Hawaii, we're building off of indigenous systems of practice and science. The ancestral circular economy is an economy that was established by our indigenous ancestors here in Hawaii. It's built off of understandings of the water system and water cycle. And resources should flow like water. These are some of the key insights that we have from our islands, and they're key towards our future here in Hawaii and across the world.
So my name is Faustin Alexis. I was born and raised in Dominica, and that's my island. I love it very much. Yes, and I don't think I want to live elsewhere because it's very quiet, peaceful. Yes, and I love nature. Yes.
Someone left 3 dogs at one of the public recycling bins in a box on top of the bin. So we're hosting them right now, fostering them, and then we hope someone will adopt them. We call them reduce, reuse, and recycle.
Are you enjoying your
Yeah,
coconut?
it's really nice. It's really nice.
So isn't it nice how nature provides us the food, but also nature has provided us natural packaging created through photosynthesis, right? It's and inside the coconut is kept nice and moist for us with its own water, right? So it's kind of like nature's own biorefinery, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, in a way it is indeed.
Yeah, because you've got 3 things going on here. You got natural packaging, right? And then you have food, and then you have water. And that is just a symbolism of to show one thing nature is giving us on the tropical islands is 3 things from one product.